it's Captain Matt, Boat Buyer's Secret Weapon, and today we're talking trolling motors. How to buy the right trolling motor based on your situation. So we're going to go through a lot of information, a lot of details. If you have comments, put them down below. Love to hear from you. We'll start with the first decision you need to make is, do I need a freshwater or saltwater trolling motor? If you're going to do any saltwater fishing, I encourage you to go with the saltwater model, even once a year. The saltwater is so corrosive, and the trolling motors are really designed, the freshwater ones, there's so many internal components that you just can't flush, that if you get saltwater in there, it's going to be damaged very, very quickly. So go to the saltwater version versus the freshwater. Typically, this is starting to change. Typically, saltwater is going to be white, freshwater is going to be black. But again, that's starting to change in the last couple model years. So make sure you check. The next decision is, how do I want to control this trolling motor? You can go the traditional tiller handle, which is going to have the throttle and the steering right on the handle. Again, it's going to be less expensive, but you don't have the flexibility. You don't have the ease of use. You have the foot pedal, which gives you a little bit the ability to fish all around the boat and controlling it wherever that pedal can reach, with that cable typically dragging along somewhere through the boat. So that's something that you got to understand how you're going to install it and which makes the most sense. And now with the digital ones, we've got the remote control steering. That's probably for most folks going to be the most convenient, but again, the most expensive and the most high-tech option that you have. Finally, let's take a look at some of the options that you want. So we talked about the remote. Do you need the ability to have iPilot, iLink, to link up to some of your other devices? Do you need the ability to spot lock, to say, hey, I want this to hold steady in this position, in this heading, so that I can fish this reef, so I can fish this structure? Then you're going to need that GPS type functionality where it can hold you steady based on GPS coordinates. They call it different things depending on the brand, but it's going to add expense to the unit, but it also is going to add practical use. So understand how you're going to use it, what's important, and what your budget looks like. Next, I think this is critical, is the lift assist, the auto stow and deploy. Hey, how easy is it going to be for you to retract this unit, especially as we get the more thrust, the longer shafts? How are we going to be able to maneuver this thing around, and what's your physical capabilities? Can you lift that whole thing up all by yourself, or is that lift assist going to be valuable? And then power steering versus cable steering. You know, if you're fishing out there for 5, 6, 7 hours fishing tournaments, if you got the cable steering, it's less expensive, but everything's going to be harder as you're pushing that thing to maneuver and to adjust, versus the power steering. It's going to be very light and simple and less fatiguing on your body. Let's go to brands for a second. Minn Kota and Motor Guide, the two big ones. There's others out there, right? But I'm going to focus on these two. Minn Kota is going to be a little bit higher quality and more technologically advanced. It's going to be more expensive. Of course, they go together. The Motor Guide is going to give you more value. So their technology is coming along, but it's not going to be the latest and greatest. They're also, quality-wise, it's going to be down a little bit from the Minn Kota. So keep that in mind. How often are you going to be using it? You know, are you dependent on this to win money in fishing tournaments? Or are you just going to be, hey, we're going to go out a handful of times on the weekend, and we're not going to be putting this thing through a lot of hard use. Maybe saving some money is more important to you than the Motor Guide may be a better option. Now, let's get into the weeds here. What type of thrust do you need? Well, it's really going to depend on the size and the weight of your boat. So this is sort of a chart. You may want to stop this, screen capture it, whatever you want to do. But what size is your boat? What's the weight of your boat? The wet weight, fuel, gear, all of that. And so what are you going to be trying to maneuver around? Because getting the lighter thrust on a trolling motor is almost always going to be a mistake if you try to skimp a little bit and save money, because it's just not going to put the boat where you need it to. It may not even be able to move the boat at all if you go too light. So look at this. The other thing you want to consider is the preferred thrust. That's probably where you want to be. And we're starting to get trolling motors coming in at over 100 pounds of thrust. And so as you get over 5,000 pounds, we're starting to put these on bigger and bigger center consoles. So you might want to look for those coming out as well. And then what type of battery power are you going to need to power these things? So if you're under 2,500, you can get by with one 12-volt battery. The kind of 3,000 to 4,000, you're looking at 24 volts, whether that's one unit or stringing two 12 volts together. As you get bigger, 36 volt, they're already starting to talk about 48 volt batteries and how can we use these to put with the higher thrust trolling motor. So that's coming, and maybe even by the time this video is out there, they'll be released. Now, what about shaft length? So we've talked about all the options, the right thrust, getting the right shaft length. It's going to depend on, are you bow mounting this or are you stern mounting it? And there are going to be different applications, different units that you're going to want to look at. What you want to do is you want to measure from the water line to where you're going to mount it on the bow. That's the distance that you need. And as you can see in that little chart, again, stop and screenshot this, but the longer the shaft you need, you want to see that shaft deep enough in the water so that as you're bobbing in the waves, that prop is still down deep in the water, okay? Same thing with the stern mount, is you've got different applications there, and you want to make sure that that's deep enough in the water so that that you're not popping out and causing potential damage to the unit, okay? And that's how you're going to measure that. Again, same thing, water line to the mounting place, to the stern mount position, and that's going to give you what shaft length is going to be most appropriate, okay? Now, there are some other accessories that that you may want to consider, and I'm actually going to recommend. So one is the onboard battery charger, especially if you're a serious fisherman. If you're really going to be out there consistently, having that onboard charger is super nice, super convenient to recharge all of those batteries that are, if they're not getting charged, you're not out fishing and catching the fish. The circuit breaker to protect your unit, and it's just a layer of protection so that you don't have an issue. That circuit will blow before it damages your expensive unit. The quick release bracket, hey, depending on where you're storing your boat, if you store it in a gravel lot, you put it outside your house, you've got it in a place where, hey, I don't want those sticky fingers to have easy access to it, where they're just going to cut the cables and rip it out. This is going to allow you to remove it quickly and stow it in a more secure location. So those quick release brackets are really nice. And then, again, if you have that quick release bracket, you want to make it easy to plug and unplug by having that receptacle. A lot of boats now have it standard where it's mounted in the bow, and it makes it simple. If you don't have that, hey, adding one, it's a DIY project. You can do it yourself with a little bit of know-how, following the instructions, and checking out some YouTube videos that would be appropriate. Let's talk a little bit about batteries. So we've zeroed in on the right unit, the right accessories, how we're doing that. The battery situation is getting a little bit murky today with the new technology. So I wanted to explain it because I think there's a clear winner in the battery options for trolling motors. You've got your lead acid deep cycle batteries, which have been around for a long time. The AGM, again, deep cycle, which means that deep cycle means it's gonna put that power out over a long period of time, right? It's not a cranking battery where you need a bunch of juice in a short burst, get it cranked up, and then, hey, you're not going to need much juice after that. These deep cycles are just going to give a continuous, long-lasting power source to something like a trolling motor. And lithium. Now, as always, the best option is going to be the most expensive. The lithium, by far the winner in most applications, unless you're going to be fishing in below freezing temperatures, then the lithium does have some downfalls there. The lead acid may make some more sense. But for most people fishing in normal conditions, the lithium batteries are going to be the best option. And again, make sure you have the right power for the unit that you're looking at, 12, 24, 36, 48 volts, whatever it may be. And make sure that you maintain those batteries properly. They're more expensive, and we'll talk a little bit more in just a little bit about how to do that. So how big of a battery do you need? This could be a little bit confusing, but I think this is a simple way to understand it. Is you have your amp hours. They're going to be rated in what's called amp hours. Let's say 100 amp hours. Now, your trolling motor is going to draw amps over a period of time. So it's going to, let's say at low usage, if you're just barely trolling around and you're not using much RPM, and you're only pulling 4 amps at a time, well, that's going to give you a 25-hour of use time, okay? If you are running and your trolling motor is maxed out and you're going up against the current and you got a big heavy boat and you're having to really crank that thing all the way to full throttle, that may pull 25 amps, okay? That may be your draw. So the 100 amp hours is really only going to give you 4 hours of actual usage. So understand how you're going to use your trolling motor, what type of draw it's going to be pulling from there, and that's going to lead you to the right size of battery. I'm going to recommend that you go with at least 100 amp hour battery rating. You know, again, consider how long in the day you're going to be fishing, but that 100 amp hour is kind of the minimum, and probably even up from there if you're really going to be serious, if you're really out for those long days, okay? Now, because you're spending a lot of money on those batteries, the great thing about the lithiums is they're going to have a longer shelf life. So even though they're more expensive up front, over the life of it, it may actually become cheaper than the lead acid, okay? So first thing is never mix the battery types for your bank of house batteries for your trolling motor. You want, if you're lithium, be all lithium. If you're lead acid, be all lead acid. If you're, keep it consistent, okay? Next, recharge as quickly as you can after every use. It's really why I like those onboard chargers, is because they're just easy. You plug them in, you're ready to go. You're not having to get to the batteries. You're not having to put alligator clips on it. None of that. If you do have a wet cell battery, make sure you're topping it off as needed. Those are going to be the lead acid type. Check your terminal connections and keep them clean of corrosion. Hey, boats are in a wet environment. If you're in salt water, it's even worse. Keep them clean. Make sure those connections are nice and tight. That's going to avoid getting a spark, causing that circuit breaker to do what it does, but that's what it's there for. But keeping that in good condition at the battery source is going to keep everything running smoother and not have issues while you're out on the water. Make sure the battery compartment is ventilated. Some of these batteries are going to get really warm as they're discharging, and so having a good airflow is going to be valuable. It's going to allow them to have a longer shelf life for you, a longer useful life. And then when you're storing the batteries in the winter, keep them in a cool, dry place. Keep them on a trickle charger in the off season so that they're not just sitting there. Make sure it's a smart charger so that you're not frying the battery, you're not overcharging it. But you want to pull them out of the boat and put them in a nice, cool, dry place in the off season, okay? That's going to help you get more life out of the battery. Now, what about installation? One of the biggest mistakes with installation is not using the right gauge of wire based on the thrust level and the distance from the battery to the trolling motor. So every instruction manual is going to have a guide that tells you this is the gauge that you need for these distances, this thrust level, and this actual trolling motor. And the gauge is really just the thickness of it. The larger the number, the smaller the wire. The smaller the number, the larger the wire. Just, it's opposite of what I think is not an electrical person, so keep that in mind. Make sure you're measuring carefully and you're being patient as you're running these wires. Use the templates that are provided when mounting. I'm going to really encourage you, if you're going to mount it yourself, that you use the templates and you also dry fit it before you start drilling. So what I mean by that is set the unit up, deploy it, stow it, deploy it, stow it. It's best if you have a helping hand to do this, so you're not dropping your trolling motor, you're not scratching your boat up, and that way you can kind of go through the motions of what it's like to use it and make sure, hey, it's not in the way when you're trying to deploy it and it's going to catch on something. That when you have it, you're trying to retract it, it's really going to be in the way based on the way you use your boat, and the way it's going to sit on the trailer and with your tow vehicle. All of those things are going to be valuable to do before you drill that first hole. I want to make sure you never drill a hole and then, oh crap, now we got to move it. Follow the manufacturer's wiring diagram to the T, using the right gauge wire. and all that. Again, having that friend as a helping hand, especially when you're dry fitting at first, and that's going to make it very, very easy. And it's also going to avoid you dropping your expensive trolling motor while you're trying to mount it. Now, the wire gauge chart, you're going to have this in the manual of whatever you get, but this is just a generic one to give you an idea of the distances, the amps, the amp draw, the max amp draw, and all of this information will be there in your owner's manual, in your instruction guides. But look for this and make sure you follow it so that you're using the right gauge wire. Now, when it comes to wiring it actually up, it's going to look something like this. Again, go to your manual and follow it exactly. So typically, it's going to look like negative to the battery negative, positive battery to negative on the second battery, positive on the second battery to the negative on the third battery, positive on the third battery to the negative on the circuit breaker, positive on the circuit breaker back to the trolling motor. And that's going to give you your 36 volt. If you have 3 separate batteries, nowadays you can get 36 volt batteries that are lithium, and they're bigger, but they're smaller than 312 volts. More expensive, but might be something if you're trying to save some space. But make sure you're wiring these up properly, and that you're not just okay, I'm going to do it the way I think it should go. No, go to the diagram and follow it exactly. The manufacturer knows what's up. This is just a quick buying guide so that you can go through the proper things: the thrust level, the shaft length, the control types, the mounting area, bow or stern, the wire gauge, the best options, the proper circuit breaker, the quick release, the plug-in receptacles, the onboard battery charger, and the proper battery. Just make all those decisions and you'll make a good choice. If you are searching for a trolling motor, we would love it if you supported the information that we provide. We've got really competitive pricing. We offer Motor Guide. We offer Minn Kota. You can go and check those out on the boatersecretweapon.com store. And we appreciate it. If you found this video valuable, give it a thumbs up, give it a like, put a question down below, put your comments down below, and remember, life truly is better on a boat.